The cold, unshakable millionaire CEO froze when she heard her mute daughter whisper for the first time. Yet it wasn't to her, but to the janitor she barely knew. Morning in the headquarters of Morgan Capital began with the soft chime of elevators and the muted hum of conversations drifting out from conference rooms. The marble lobby gleamed as though it had been polished by hand only moments ago, the glass walls reflecting the city skyline beyond. Miranda Morgan stepped through the revolving doors with her usual precision, every movement deliberate, her posture unyielding. She was 35, a millionaire, CEO of the company her father had founded, and her presence alone could make a boardroom fall silent. Her navy blue suit was tailored to perfection, her dark hair pulled back to reveal eyes the color of deep coffee, sharp, assessing, and unreadable to anyone who didn't know her. Beside her walked her 5-year-old daughter Maya, a small figure in a sunshine yellow dress that seemed almost too bright for this sterile corporate world. Her dark hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, but her face carried no smile. She clung to Miranda's hand, though not tightly, just 2 fingers hooked loosely, as if she needed a connection but feared holding on too hard. For nearly 9 months, Maya had not spoken a single word. Not to her mother, not to her teachers, not to the therapist Miranda had hired at any price. The specialist called it selective mutism, a condition brought on by trauma or overwhelming anxiety. In their case, the trigger had been devastating, the night her father left. Maya had been standing in the hallway when the front door slammed, the sound echoing through the apartment like a crack of thunder. Since then, her world had gone quiet. Miranda, in her relentless way, attacked the problem like any other corporate crisis, finding the best experts, the most innovative treatments, booking every hour that could possibly help. But nothing worked. Her daughter's voice seemed locked away somewhere Miranda couldn't reach. They passed the reception desk, and Miranda nodded briefly at the staff without breaking stride. The click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound between them. Then from somewhere in the open office ahead, there came a sudden, metallic clatter. A dropped tray. The sharp noise cut through the air like an electric jolt. Maya froze, her small body tensing instantly. She let go of her mother's fingers and bolted toward the tall windows lining the far wall. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, her hands flat against it, her breathing quick and shallow, almost imperceptible. Miranda's instincts told her to crouch down, to try the calming phrases she'd practiced, but her own voice came out tight, too controlled. "It's okay," she said, though it sounded more like an order than comfort. It was then that a man pushing a cleaning cart came to a stop a few feet away. He wasn't one of the uniformed front desk staff or the sharply dressed executives Miranda usually encountered. His dark blue coveralls were rolled at the sleeves, revealing strong forearms. His black hair was slightly mussed, and there was a warmth in his expression that seemed entirely out of place in this sterile morning rush. His name, according to the patch stitched to his chest, was Ben Bennett. He was 36, a janitor who worked both early mornings and late nights in the building. But at that moment, he wasn't looking at Miranda at all. His eyes were fixed on Maya, studying her carefully as though he recognized her fear. Without a word, Ben reached into the side pocket of his cart and pulled out a small feather duster. Not the bulky kind, but a delicate white plume attached to a thin handle. He crouched down a short distance away from Maya, far enough to give her space, and set the feather gently on the back of his hand. Then he blew on it, slow and steady. The feather floated up, drifted sideways, and then settled again. Another breath sent it spinning lazily in the air, before it landed on the polished floor. He caught it lightly, then let it go again. Maya's small shoulders eased ever so slightly. Her gaze slipped from the safety of the window to the feather in the air. Ben's voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke, as if sharing a secret only she could hear. "Wind game," he murmured. "You don't have to talk. Just breathe." He extended the feather toward her, not touching her, simply offering it on his palm. Hesitant, she turned from the glass. Her tiny hand reached out and took the feather. She inhaled, exhaled. The plume barely stirred. She tried again, her breath steadier this time, and it lifted, drifting toward his shoe before falling softly to the floor. Ben's eyes crinkled in a smile, though his mouth hardly moved. "There you go," he said quietly. Miranda watched, caught off guard by the subtle transformation. It wasn't that Maya had spoken, But for the first time in months, she was interacting, engaging, breathing without that sharp edge of panic. Miranda realized she was holding her own breath, and when she let it out, it came with an unexpected wave of gratitude toward this man she'd never noticed before. She had hired the best professionals money could buy, and yet it was a janitor with a feather who had just reached her daughter in a way no one else had managed. In that moment, Miranda Morgan, who prided herself on having every answer, understood that the solution might come from where she least expected it. The next morning began earlier than usual for Miranda. She sat at the long marble counter in her kitchen, a cup of untouched coffee cooling by her side, staring at the city skyline through the wall of glass. Maya sat opposite her, quietly pushing pieces of fruit around her plate without eating. The image of the man from yesterday, Ben with his calm voice and that absurdly simple feather, kept intruding into Miranda's thoughts. It wasn't just that he had distracted Maya. It was the way he had done it without pushing, without expectation, without that air of analysis she had grown used to from specialists. He had met her silence as if it were normal, and somehow that had opened a crack in the wall her daughter had built. By the time they arrived at Morgan Capital, Miranda had decided she needed to speak to him. She didn't know exactly why. To thank him? To understand what he'd done? Or maybe to see if it could happen again. Whatever the reason, she found herself scanning the lobby as they entered. The hum of morning activity was everywhere. Interns balancing trays of coffee, executives briskly checking their phones, the receptionists greeting guests. And then she saw him. Bent over his cleaning cart near the row of elevators, sleeves rolled again, hair slightly messy, as if he had already been working for hours. He noticed her looking and straightened, not with the deferential stiffness she often saw from employees who recognized her, but with the easy posture of someone who didn't feel the need to perform. "Morning," he said simply, glancing at Maya and giving her a small nod, as though they shared a secret. Miranda hesitated, then stepped closer. "Can we talk?" "Just for a moment," she asked, her voice lower than usual. She was aware of curious eyes turning their way, but for once, she didn't care. Ben wheeled his cart out of the foot traffic and gestured to a quieter corner near the windows. "Sure," he said. "Is everything okay?" "I wanted to thank you," Miranda began, and she realized she meant it more than she had expected. "Yesterday, what you did with Maya, I've never seen her respond like that in months." Ben's gaze softened. "It's not magic," he said. "She just needed something safe to focus on, something she could control without feeling watched." Miranda studied him for a moment. "You knew exactly what to do," she said. "How?" He rested his hands on the handle of the cart. "My son Miles stopped speaking for 6 months after his mom died. He was 7 then. We tried therapists, specialists, all the things people tell you to try. But sometimes the first step isn't a word. It's just breathing together. The feather, the bubbles, little games. They helped him feel safe enough to make a sound again." Miranda felt an unexpected pull in her chest. "I didn't know." She stopped herself. She wasn't in the habit of admitting she didn't know something, especially to someone she had technically hired through a cleaning contractor. "I've been trying everything, but it's all been very structured, very clinical." Ben nodded. "Sometimes structure feels like pressure. Kids pick up on that." There was a long pause. Maya had been standing quietly beside her mother, watching Ben without looking directly at him. Now he crouched down to her level, careful to keep some space between them. From his cart, he pulled 2 paper cups and a roll of string. "Do you know what this is?" he asked her gently. He poked a hole in the bottom of each cup, threaded the string through, and tied knots. "It's a phone, but not like the ones we carry around. This one only works if you want it to." He handed her 1 cup and kept the other for himself. "You don't have to talk into it. You can hum, you can blow, you can just hold it and feel the string move." Maya looked at the cup in her hands. After a moment, she pressed it against her mouth and exhaled softly. The string quivered, and in Ben's cup there was the faintest vibration. He smiled. "See? Works already." Miranda watched, barely breathing. The interaction was so small, so ordinary, and yet it felt monumental. For the first time in months, Maya wasn't recoiling from someone's attempts to reach her. She was engaging, on her own terms. After a few minutes, Ben put the cups back in his cart. "She's got patience," he said, standing again. "That's good. We can work with patience." Miranda felt herself saying words before she had time to think about them. Would you come by my office tomorrow morning? Just for a little while. I'll arrange it with building security. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but there was no hesitation in his voice. If you're sure you want that, he said. I'm sure, she replied. As she led Maya toward the elevators, Miranda was acutely aware that she had just broken one of her own unspoken rules. She had invited someone into her carefully controlled world without knowing exactly how it would go. But for once, the uncertainty didn't feel like a risk. It felt like the first real chance at something that might work. The following morning, Miranda arrived at the office earlier than usual. The hallway still smelled faintly of the overnight cleaning, a mix of citrus polish and freshly vacuumed carpet. Her heels echoed through the empty space as she unlocked her office, the glass walls gleaming in the early light. She had cleared her calendar for the first 2 hours of the day, an almost unheard of decision, and instructed her assistant not to schedule or route any calls. Today, she wanted no interruptions. Maya was with her, still in her yellow dress from yesterday because she had insisted on wearing it again. Miranda had agreed, perhaps because it was the first thing her daughter had expressed a clear preference for in months. Maya sat on the sofa by the window, her legs tucked under her, gazing out at the sprawling city far below. Miranda set her leather bag down and turned toward the door, just as a quiet knock sounded. When Ben stepped in, he carried no cleaning cart this time. Instead, he had a canvas tote slung over his shoulder, and he looked almost uncertain, though not in the way of someone intimidated by the CEO's office. He was simply taking in the space, noting the polished surfaces, the rows of neatly aligned books, the perfect symmetry. He gave a small nod. Morning. Miranda gestured toward the open area of her office where she had cleared the coffee table. Come in. I thought we could set up here. Ben crouched and began pulling things from the tote. Out came the feather from the other day. A small bottle of bubble solution, 2 paper cups and a fresh ball of string, a bright pinwheel, and a pack of colorful cards with large letters printed on them. He laid them out neatly, like a craftsman setting his tools before work. Miranda sat across from them, watching as Maya slowly slid off the sofa and approached, her steps hesitant but curious. Ben didn't rush to greet her. He simply picked up the feather, balanced it on his palm, and looked at her with a quiet invitation. This is the first step, he explained, glancing briefly at Miranda, but keeping his attention mostly on Maya. Breathing together. No pressure to make words, just breath. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled in a slow, steady stream that sent the feather drifting. Maya's eyes tracked it without moving her head. He handed it to her, and she mimicked his movement. The feather wavered, rose, and fell. Her lips twitched, the ghost of a smile almost forming. They moved to the bubbles next. Ben blew one large bubble and let it float toward her. She reached for it, and when it popped on her fingertip, she looked up at him in surprise. He chuckled softly. That's how words work too. You make them. They float out, and sometimes they disappear. But you can always make another. After a few rounds of bubbles, Ben brought out the paper cups again. He tightened the string this time, showing her how if she whispered into her cup, the sound would travel along the taut line to his ear. You don't have to use your voice yet, he said gently. You can just hum or breathe, but the string will still hear you. Maya hesitated, then put her mouth to the cup and exhaled a small puff of air. Ben pressed his ear to his cup and nodded with exaggerated seriousness. Got it. Loud and clear. Maya's hands tightened around the cup, and she tried again, this time with a faint hum. Miranda heard it, almost imperceptible, but it was sound. It was hers. They kept the pace slow. When Ben brought out the letter cards, he didn't ask her to say anything. He laid them in a loose circle and pointed to each one, naming them quietly, letting her watch his mouth without expectation. After a while, she picked up one card, the letter M, held it in her lap. Ben didn't comment, but Miranda noticed. When the hour was up, Ben began packing his things. We don't push, he said to Miranda as he slid the cards into the tote. She'll climb the steps when she's ready. The important part is that she knows there's no rush. Miranda glanced toward Maya, who was still holding the M card, tracing the shape of the letter with her finger. Something inside Miranda loosened, just a fraction. For months, she had been trying to solve her daughter's silence like a business problem. A set of tasks to be completed, a deadline to be met. But this was different. This was slower, messier, and yet it felt more like progress than anything else had. As Ben slung the tote over his shoulder, Miranda found herself saying, "Same time tomorrow?" He smiled. "I'll be here." After he left, Miranda walked over to Maya and knelt beside her. The little girl looked up and held out the M card. Miranda took it carefully, her fingers brushing her daughter's. "That's a good letter," she said softly. "It's the start of a lot of important words." Maya didn't speak, but she leaned against her mother's side. And for the first time in a long while, Miranda felt as if they were both standing on the first step of something worth climbing. 2 days later, Miranda found herself arriving at the office with a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite name. It was unusual for her to look forward to anything unrelated to meetings, contracts, or quarterly reports. Yet now there was a subtle pull in her mornings. The knowledge that Ben would be there, waiting with his tote of odd little tools ready to work with Maya in a way that didn't feel like work at all. This morning, however, something had shifted. Maya walked beside her mother without holding her hand. Her yellow dress had been traded for soft denim overalls and a white t-shirt, and she clutched a small stuffed rabbit to her chest. She didn't smile, but there was a certain lightness to her steps, a curiosity in her eyes as they stepped into the lobby. Ben was already there, leaning casually against his cart, the tote slung over one shoulder. When he saw Maya, he gave a small wave. Not exaggerated, not forced, just enough for her to know he saw her. She paused mid-step, then took 2 small, deliberate steps toward him, before glancing back at Miranda. Her mother gave the faintest nod, and Maya closed the distance herself. "Hey, partner," Ben said softly. "You ready for today?" He crouched so he could see her face without towering over her. From the tote, he pulled a small wind-up toy, a bright red ladybug that wobbled when it moved. He wound it and set it on the floor. It rattled forward, spinning in a small circle before toppling over. Maya's lips pressed together in a way that almost suggested a laugh, though no sound came. She knelt and righted the toy, pushing it gently toward him. They made their way upstairs to Miranda's office, the three of them together. Ben unpacked his supplies while Maya wandered to the large window, peering down at the miniature cars and people below. "We're going to try something new today," he told her. He held up a clear plastic jar filled with smooth, colorful stones. Some pale blue, others deep green, a few bright yellow. Each stone can be a sound, a thought, a piece of something you want to share. You don't have to say it out loud. You just pick a stone and place it where you want it to go. He spread a piece of felt on the coffee table and set the jar down. Slowly, Maya came over and sat cross-legged on the floor. She peered into the jar, her small fingers selecting a single yellow stone. Without prompting, she placed it in the center of the felt. Ben mirrored her by choosing a blue one and setting it beside hers. "That's how we build something together," he said, "one piece at a time." They continued in silence, arranging stones into loose patterns, sometimes a line, sometimes a cluster. Miranda sat off to the side, resisting the urge to interfere. She watched how Ben would occasionally hum softly. Not a song she recognized, just a steady low tone that filled the quiet. Every so often, Maya would hum back, barely audible, but enough for him to notice. He never reacted in a way that broke her concentration. Instead, he matched her tone and carried it a little longer before letting it fade. After half an hour, Ben brought out the paper cup phone again. This time, he didn't demonstrate. He simply slid one cup toward her and held the other to his ear, his eyes closed as if he were listening for the faintest sound. Maya stared at the cup for a long moment. Then, with great care, she put it to her mouth and released a single, soft sound. It was the first intentional vocal sound she had made in months. Ben opened his eyes slowly and smiled. Not the kind of smile that celebrated a victory, but one that acknowledged something sacred. "Got it," he said gently. Loud and clear. Miranda felt a tightness in her chest, a surge of emotion so strong she had to look away for a moment. It wasn't a word, but it was the beginning of one. It was proof that the voice she'd feared was gone forever was still there, waiting. When the session ended, Maya gathered the stones into the jar without being asked. She lingered by Ben's tote before they left, her small hand brushing against the fabric. Ben noticed but didn't speak of it. As they walked to the elevator, Miranda caught his eye. "You're doing something no one else has been able to do," she said quietly. Ben shook his head. "She's doing it. I'm just here to make sure she knows she can." For the rest of the day, Miranda couldn't stop replaying that single sound in her head. That soft, fragile and yet impossibly strong. It was the smallest step, but to her, it felt like a leap. By the end of the week, a quiet routine had taken shape. Every morning, Miranda would bring Maya into the office, and within minutes, Ben would appear with his tote of mismatched objects that seemed more like relics from a childhood attic than tools for any kind of therapy. There was a rhythm to it now, a subtle choreography in which Miranda stepped back, allowing Ben and Maya to find their own pace, their own world. But this morning, the weather had turned. Heavy rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Miranda's office, and the city beyond was shrouded in a blur of gray. Maya sat by the glass, watching the rivulets race each other downward, her stuffed rabbit resting in her lap. Ben came in shaking droplets from his hair, a damp jacket folded over his arm. He greeted them with his usual understated warmth, then reached into his tote and pulled out something new, a small handheld kaleidoscope. It was brass, worn smooth at the edges, and when he handed it to Maya, the soft clink of glass inside caught her attention immediately. She lifted it to her eye and gasped silently, twisting the end to watch colors shift and fracture into endless patterns. Ben crouched beside her. "Every time you turn it," he said, "it changes, just like a voice, just like a day." For nearly 15 minutes, she stayed with the kaleidoscope, occasionally holding it out so he could look too. He'd respond with an exaggerated "oh" or a low whistle, which made the corners of her mouth lift. Not a full smile, but a flicker of one. Miranda, watching from her desk, noticed that Maya's breathing had changed. It was deeper, steadier, without the sharp edge of tension that used to come whenever she was asked to engage. After the kaleidoscope, Ben set it gently on the table and brought out the bubble solution. This time, instead of blowing them himself, he handed the wand to Maya. She dipped it carefully, lifting it toward her mouth. The first try failed. The bubble popped before it left the wand. But she didn't retreat into frustration. She tried again, and this time, a single bubble floated upward, catching the soft light from the window. Ben followed it with his eyes. "There it goes," he said. "That one's yours." Then he surprised Miranda by pulling a small portable recorder from his tote. He didn't switch it on immediately. Instead, he held it up so Maya could see the red button. "This is like a bubble catcher," he explained. "It doesn't keep the shape, but it keeps the sound. You don't have to say anything. You could hum, you could tap the table, you could even just breathe into it." Maya stared at the recorder, then at him. Slowly, she reached out and pressed the button herself. She held it near her mouth and released a quiet hum. Barely audible, but real. When she stopped, Ben pressed another button, and the hum played back, slightly distorted but recognizable. Her eyes widened. She touched her chest as if confirming that the sound had truly come from her. Miranda's throat tightened at the sight. It was such a small thing, a few seconds of sound, but it was her daughter hearing herself again, proof that her voice still existed in the world. Ben didn't make it into a celebration. He simply nodded and said, "That's yours. You can keep it here if you want, or I can erase it whenever you say." He offered her the recorder, but she shook her head, leaving it on the table. Miranda noticed her fingers lingering near it before she pulled her hand away. When their time ended, the rain had eased into a soft drizzle. As Ben packed up, Miranda stepped closer. "You've done more in a week than anyone has in almost a year," she said quietly. He glanced at her, the weight of her words settling between them. "You've given her the space to try," he replied. "Most parents, they get scared and try to fill the silence. You've let her own it." She wanted to tell him that she hadn't been that parent before, that it was his patience, not hers, that had made this possible. But the words stuck, unspoken in her throat. After Ben left, Maya wandered to the table, picked up the recorder, and pressed play. Her soft hum filled the room again, barely more than a whisper. She didn't look at Miranda when she pressed the button to stop it, but there was a stillness to her, the kind that comes from holding on to something precious. And Miranda knew, without doubt, that they had just crossed another line in the sand, one that led forward, not back. The following Monday, the air in the city carried the sharp bite of early autumn. Leaves skittered across the pavement as Miranda guided Maya through the revolving doors of Morgan Capital. The lobby smelled faintly of polished brass and coffee, a comforting contrast to the brisk air outside. Ben was already there, Not by his cart this time, but seated on a bench near the far wall, as if he'd been waiting for them. When he spotted Maya, he didn't call out or wave. He simply stood and smiled in that quiet way of his, the way that told her she was the only person he was seeing in that moment. Today he carried a different bag, not the usual tote, but a battered leather satchel that looked like it had seen years of use. As they reached the elevator, Miranda caught his eye. "New tools?" she asked. "Something like that," he said, his voice almost conspiratorial. In her office, Maya gravitated toward the window as she always did, pressing her palm against the glass. The city was spread out beneath them, sunlight bouncing off the tops of buildings. Ben didn't interrupt her. He knelt on the carpet and began unpacking the satchel, revealing an assortment of small wooden blocks, each with a letter carved into it, the grooves darkened with age. "These belong to my grandmother," he told her as he lined them up. "She used to keep them in a tin under her bed. Said they were for rainy days and quiet afternoons." He pushed a block toward her. "The letter M. This one looks familiar, doesn't it?" Maya's fingers curled around it immediately. She didn't look at him, but she didn't put it down either. Ben began sliding more blocks toward her, each time naming the letter softly, not asking her to repeat it, just letting the sound settle. After a while, he set aside 3 blocks, M, A, and Y. He placed them in order, then looked at her without saying anything. She stared at the arrangement, then reached for the A and shifted it slightly so the 3 blocks were perfectly aligned. Miranda saw the faintest curve of her lips. They moved from blocks to a game Ben called Story Stones. From a small pouch, he spilled out smooth pebbles painted with simple images. A sun, a bird, a boat, a tree. "You can tell a story without speaking," he explained. "Just put the stones in the order you want, and I'll try to guess what's happening." Maya examined the stones, then chose the bird, the tree, and the boat. She placed them carefully on the carpet in a line. Ben studied them as if deciphering a code. He murmured. "A bird rests in a tree, but then it flies to a boat. Maybe it's going on a journey." Her eyes flicked up to his, and for a moment, she seemed on the edge of making a sound. But instead, she picked up the sunstone and added it to the sequence. Ben nodded. "A journey in the morning," he said. "That's the best time to start one." Midway through the session, he pulled out the paper cup phone again, this time with a twist. He had decorated the cups with bright stickers and drawn silly faces on them. "This one's mine," he said, holding up a cup with a lopsided grin. "This one's yours." He offered her the second cup, which had a rabbit face drawn on it. She took it, holding it close to her chest. Without prompting, she pressed the cup to her lips and let out a quiet, again. Longer this time, with a slight rise and fall in tone. Ben closed his eyes, listening, then gave a satisfied nod. "That one traveled far," he said. "I almost had to chase it." Miranda, sitting on the sofa, felt something shift inside her. It was as though the sound had weight, had anchored itself in the room. For the first time in months, she wasn't just hoping her daughter would speak again. She was starting to believe she would. As the hour came to a close, Maya surprised them both by taking the M block from the table and placing it in Ben's satchel herself. She didn't look at him as she did it, but the gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Ben zipped the bag slowly, his expression unreadable except for the smallest lift at the corner of his mouth. "Guess I'll have to bring it back tomorrow," he said. When he left, the room felt different, warmer somehow, even in the high, glass-walled space. Miranda glanced at her daughter, who was now sitting cross-legged on the carpet, tracing the edge of the story stones with her fingertips. And for the first time since this had all begun, Miranda didn't feel like they were fighting against silence. She felt like they were building toward something. The next day, Miranda arrived at the office to find Ben already inside, standing near the large window where Maya usually perched. He had asked to come a little earlier so he could set something up before she and her daughter arrived. Now, the coffee table in the center of the room was covered with an unusual arrangement. A shallow wooden tray filled with fine sand, a small paintbrush, and a few seashells. Maya's eyes lit up the moment she stepped through the door. "Ever been to the ocean?" Ben asked her gently as she approached. She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on the shells. They were smooth and glossy, worn down by years of tide and salt. He picked up one and rolled it in his palm. "These came from a beach I used to visit with my mom. She'd say the ocean is a place that listens to you, even if you don't talk." Maya sat down on the carpet beside the tray without hesitation. Ben handed her the paintbrush. "We can draw in the sand," he said. "Anything you want. Shapes, letters, nothing at all." At first, she dragged the brush in slow, uncertain lines. Then she began making loops and spirals, her movements quickening as the sand responded to her touch. She paused, looked at Ben, and then, very deliberately, drew the letter M. Miranda, watching from the sofa, felt a tremor of recognition. Ben didn't comment on the letter, just picked up the brush and drew a small wave beside it. "That's the ocean," he said. "Your letter's right by the water?" He set the brush down, and for a moment they both just looked at the simple shapes they had made together. Then Ben pulled a small glass jar from his bag, half filled with more sand. He shook it lightly so it made a soft, grainy sound. "This one's for keeping," he told her. "You can add to it if you want. Every grain is like a word. Even if it's tiny, it still matters." They moved on to the cup phone again, and this time Ben didn't initiate. He simply left the cups on the table while he looked out the window, giving her space. After a minute, Maya reached for the cup with the rabbit face from yesterday, placed it against her mouth, and released not just a hum, but something closer to a vowel, a faint ah sound that caught both Miranda and Ben off guard. Ben turned back to her slowly, his expression calm but his eyes bright. "That one traveled fast," he said softly, picking up his own cup. "Faster than the wind." Maya lowered her cup and looked down, almost shy, but there was no sign of retreat. Instead, she picked up the M block from Ben's satchel, which he had left slightly open, and placed it next to the sand tray. She tapped it once with her fingertip, then glanced at him. Ben met her gaze. "You're building something," he said, "piece by piece." Miranda realized her heart was pounding. The sound, that tiny, fragile ah, was still echoing in her mind. She wanted to praise Maya, to rush over and hold her, but she stopped herself. Ben had taught her that progress like this couldn't be smothered by excitement. It needed room to breathe. As the session drew to a close, Ben began packing up. Before he zipped the satchel, Maya reached in, pulled out the story stone with the bird, and set it in front of him. Her meaning was clear, even without words. She wanted it to be part of tomorrow. When they left the office together, the city was glowing with the golden light of late afternoon. Miranda walked a half step behind them, watching how Ben adjusted his stride so Maya could keep pace. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, full of the unspoken knowledge that something was changing. And though Miranda didn't say it aloud, she knew. They were approaching the moment when the silence would break completely. The following morning, the air felt charged before they had even left the apartment. Miranda couldn't explain it. There was no particular sign, no visible change in her daughter's demeanor. But something in the way Maya held her stuffed rabbit close and looked out the car window made her feel as if the day had been marked for something important. When they stepped into the office, Ben was already there, crouched on the floor with the wooden tray of sand set out again, the letter blocks stacked neatly to one side, and the story stones arranged in a small circle. Beside them sat something new, a small battery-powered lantern shaped like a lighthouse. Its soft, warm glow pulsed in a slow rhythm, like breathing. Ben looked up as they entered. "Morning," he said, and his tone was lighter than usual, almost as if he'd been waiting for this day. He gestured toward the lantern. "This is for guiding ships home. Even in the dark, they can find their way if they see the light." Maya stepped forward and knelt beside it, her fingers brushing the smooth white surface. Ben reached into his satchel and pulled out two small paper cups, the same ones they had been using for days, the rabbit face still faintly smudged from her touch. He placed one in front of her and kept the other. Instead of speaking, he pointed to the M block and then to the cup, making it clear without words that today's game was to send that letter through the string, from her side to his. She picked up the block, studied it, and then set it down. Her fingers tightened around the cup. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. Ben lifted his cup to his ear and closed his eyes. Maya pressed hers to her mouth. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the sound of her breathing, steady and measured. And then, in a voice so soft Miranda almost doubted she'd heard it, came a single word. "Mom!" The sound was imperfect, hushed, almost broken, but it was unmistakable. It traveled through the string, through the air, straight into Miranda's chest like a lightning strike. She froze where she stood, her hands tightening around the back of the chair in front of her. Ben didn't react with surprise. He simply lowered his cup, his eyes meeting Maya's, and nodded once. "That's your light," he said quietly. "Don't let it go out." Miranda sank to her knees beside her daughter, but she didn't scoop her up or cry out. Instead, she looked her in the eyes and whispered, "I heard you." It was all she could manage without her voice breaking completely. Maya looked down for a moment, then lifted the cup again and repeated the word, a fraction louder this time. The sound trembled, but it held. Miranda pressed her hand gently against her daughter's cheek, letting the warmth of that moment settle deep into her bones. Ben began gathering the blocks and stones, moving quietly, giving them space. But before he packed away the lantern, Maya reached out and touched it, her fingers lingering on the steady pulse of light. She then pushed it toward him, her way of telling him she wanted it to stay. When the session ended, they all walked to the elevator together. Miranda noticed that Maya was holding her head a little higher, her rabbit tucked under one arm instead of clutched like a shield. As the doors closed, Miranda glanced at Ben. "You've given her back something I thought was gone forever," she said. He shook his head. "She had it all along. I just helped her see it." That night, as Miranda tucked Maya into bed, her daughter's voice echoed in her mind, fragile yet fierce, a sound she knew she would carry with her forever. For the first time in years, she didn't dread the silence between them. She knew it wouldn't last. The light was on now, and it would lead them both home. To me, the ending of this story is more than just a happy resolution. It's a testament to the quiet, unglamorous power of patience, empathy, and presence. What Ben did for Maya wasn't magic, and it wasn't about swooping in as a hero. It was about creating a safe space where her voice could return on her own terms. The final moment, when she says "Mom," is not just a victory for the child. It's a profound reminder that healing often happens in the smallest, most fragile steps. It's also a redemption arc for Miranda, who learns that love isn't always about protecting someone from their silence, but about walking alongside them until they're ready to fill it. For me, that lighthouse lantern Ben brought in wasn't just a prop. It was a metaphor for the entire journey. He didn't pull her out of the dark. He simply lit the way, and she found her own way forward. That, in my view, is what makes this story powerful. It's not about saving someone. It's about helping them save themselves.